You're listening to SpectraCast, the show where I get behind the scenes on diversity and inclusion. I'll be talking to a number of people who have taken steps towards greater inclusion of others, and also with those who have benefited from being included in the workplace. Whilst my bias might be towards recruiting and retaining neurodiverse people, I'll also explore practical approaches to being more inclusive overall. Hi, I'm your host Chris Turner, and I've made it my mission to help employers to embrace and reap the rewards of being more inclusive of neurodiversity. In doing so, I hope to do my little part in ensuring more neurodiverse people get the same opportunities and choices as everyone else when it comes to work and employment. So, if you're curious and want to learn from those who are doing it, and you favour action over inaction, then stick around. So thanks for joining me today. I'm sitting down with Janette Purkis, who is an autistic advocate, author and presenter. And we're going to hear from Janette about her experiences as an autistic person in gaining and maintaining employment. And it's a really great chat with Janette, so hopefully you'll enjoy. Let's get into it. Yeah, we throw in a dog a bone. Is this a charity thing, or is there actually real value in it? You know, because I think you and I both know that there is, but it's trying to get to that sort of a view for people and help them understand that it's not just about, you know, doing good and the like. There's real purpose behind it. So,
well, my employer, just for an example of one, me, my employer has always thought I'm an incredible staff member, and I've worked in several different areas, and almost every director and supervisor I have ever had has been like, wow, this person's amazing. I have a huge work ethic. My capability to sit down and do stuff is off the scale. My focus. So I put headphones in, and unless someone actually wants to engage me in conversation, I don't talk to anyone, and I sit there and I do my job, and I'm totally focused, and I don't really waste time. I take a little break every hour or so I don't get too, like doing some non-work thing for a couple of minutes. Yeah. But generally, if I'm at work, and I've said that to my managers, if I'm being paid squillions of dollars to do this job, I need to be doing this job. Like, why would I be getting that kind of thing? Honesty, loyalty. I've been in the same department and its predecessors because the public service changes, every time there's an election and stuff.
Yeah.
I've been in the same sort of area for almost 12 years, and it would never even cross my mind to leave. I care about my job, and I think this is echoed by a lot. If you get an autistic person in the workplace and they're doing well and they're properly supported and they actually feel they're making a difference there and they're included, chances are they will be an exceptional employee. The issues you have are when are you recording as well? Because if
I am.
That's cool.
Well, it'll be primarily voice only, so hey, no one wants to see my mug on too often.
Things to my face or anything. I got the new glasses. I look very studious. It's really nice.
Yes, you do. They're very nice.
Thank you. But in the workplace, when autistic people have a problem, it's usually reasonably easily fixable as long as the employer or the manager knows what the issue is. And if the autistic person can communicate what the issue is, that's fantastic. And if the employer understands and responds, that's even more fantastic. But you do tend to find the workplace adjustments for autistic staff members are usually quite minor. They might involve taking out a fluorescent light bulb above their workstation, giving them a spare office in an office sort of environment so they're not listening to all the background noise, which I find that really hard working in an open plan office, and I don't have my own office. I'm on the floor. And I do find that hard when my supervisor's talking to me and there's all these conversations going on that are hard to filter out. It's like all the information's coming at once. And that kind of thing can be really difficult, but it's reasonably easily solved.
Yeah.
Those who are autistic have a range of really nifty soft skills. So soft skills, of course, are the skills that you can't really teach or that are very hard to teach. You can send someone to do an Excel course. Someone doesn't know how to do a technical skill, you send them off to do a course on it. That's really easy to teach. with soft skills, if people don't have them, they're incredibly difficult to teach. And some of the ones the autistic staff members tend to have, obviously attention to detail, which is a bit of a cliche, but it's usually quite accurate.
Yeah.
Also loyalty, honesty, a work ethic, caring about what they do, a sense of being part of the business of making things work in the workplace. We often get the rudeness thing levelled at us, but usually not rudeness, it's just being blunt. And if you explain to someone that can be seen in this way by somebody else, we tend to be very thoughtful and kind. And generally, I get a bit sad when people go on about the rudeness thing, because I think it's so often just accidental and unintentional. And actually, if you talk to an autistic person, most of us are very, very caring of others and very thoughtful, and we don't want to upset anyone. So it's the perceptions thing. I think employers need to understand more about autism to get the best out of an autistic employee. The other thing that's really important is finding work in a workplace that suits the autistic staff member. If you've got someone poorly placed, if they're in an area where they don't feel engaged, or where they're not interested, or they don't understand the subject matter, or where there are interpersonal issues, that can make or break that employee's placement. And it often means that they leave the workplace or they get performance managed out because they're not happy. If you're not happy, you're not productive. The interpersonal stuff is so important. Sorry, I'm just rambling here, but I think there's some useful.
But you know what? You say that, and the thought that's going through my head is, but how's that different to anyone else?
Well, yes, that's true.
Isn't it? And is this the challenge that we have, is that we think that autistic people are going to be so different, and we've got to really treat them with cotton wool or something special. But actually they're just another person who has the same needs and challenges that may manifest slightly differently. But
the other thing is, if you're an employer and you put in place things that work for autistic staff members, guess what? They're going to help everybody else too, because the things that help us help everyone on the same sort of note, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And actually, not just doing something for this individual, by making our workplace less sensory jangly, well, that's going to impact on everyone. Other people might not realise that all the background noise is a bit stressful. They might not be aware of that because they haven't articulated it before. But if things are easier to navigate with sensory stuff or with interpersonal stuff, and people be more respectful to each other, that's fantastic. And these things have this lovely flow on to the whole workforce. But anyway, ask me some questions. I could talk about this all day, but
how about, so I think employment for me, it always sort of feels a little bit like a journey. So there's this search for work, apply for work, all things going well, get work, and then I've got to hold on to the work. So if we were at the beginning of that process and we're looking at, so that initial interaction between a candidate or a job seeker and an employer, what are some of the challenges or the barriers that you've seen for autistic people getting past that recruitment process? Because for a lot of people, that seems to be a real hurdle.
There's a few things, and obviously the interview is a big problem for most of us. I'll get back to that later. That's a whole specific problem. But one of the things is we struggle to sell ourselves. So when you're going for a job, you have to market yourself to the employer. You have to make yourself look as absolutely wonderful as you can so that you stand out from the other candidates. Now, non-autistic people tend to do a little bit of white lies. I don't mean in an unethical sense, but I mean they embellish their skills and experience, and that's understood. That's what an employer is expecting to see. Autistic people, we don't generally do that. We struggle to do that because we might think that's dishonest, or it might not even cross our mind that that's something we need to do. And so we're putting ourselves, just by nature of who we are, this puts it as at a disadvantage with a lot of employers, because they are expecting the hard sell. This is me, I'm good at that, I'm good at this, I've done all these great things, yay, employ me. The other thing is a lack of confidence. So if you go through school and you experience bullying and abuse and all of those things, if you live in a world that is different from how your understanding is of the world, and you're sort of a minority and you're in the outer and you feel isolated and you struggle to make friends, and then you start going for work, well, you're lacking confidence. It's very difficult, especially as a young person, but for anyone really. It is hard to be confident if you've gone through all those difficulties and challenges that actually are invalidations. They're saying you don't matter. So when you want to go for a job, you need to think, I do matter. I matter so much. The employer will say, yay, what an awesome person, I need to hire them. But if you're really underconfident and you're really honest, that's almost impossible for a lot of people. It's a really difficult thing. So building self-esteem is so important to building employability and ability to join the workforce. It's a really important point. The other one, of course, is the interview. So you get to interview, you need to be confident. Basically, interviews favour confident extroverts. So if you're a confident extrovert and you go to an interview, it's going to be awesome. You'll have a lovely conversation. You'll just say, I'm so good, I need this job, please hire me. And it will all be good. If you're not a confident extrovert, and if you find the whole process of being in a room full of strangers firing questions at you, and your livelihood depends on this. So it's not just a conversation. This is a highly loaded conversation. This is your life, especially if you really want the job or if you're really poor and you desperately need the job. So that's really difficult. Also, the interpersonal skills that we have don't always translate to the interview process. And if we're really anxious, then our sort of coping strategies may be more obvious. And if people don't understand about that, we might seem to be a little bit odd. And most employers don't want an odd staff member because, I mean, rightfully or wrongfully, they worry that an odd staff member might not be cohesive with the team. So there's all these things at play. And then you wonder about whether or not you should say you're autistic, and that's another whole conversation.
It is, yeah.
Closure. And that, when do you do this? Do you do it at all? Who do you say it to? All of that stuff. And all of these things mean it's extremely hard for us to actually get into the workplace in the first place. Now, some of the organisations working with autistic job seekers, people like the Dandelion program and Specialist Earn and all of them, have some other strategies around interviews, which I think are great. I think Dandelion has a 3-week program, and it's like an assessment, and it's not an interview. So you don't actually have to get everything together and do half an hour of being wonderful. You get to do the job, and you can prove whether you can do it or not. And I think that's much better. The thing about interviews, exams and IQ tests are very similar. So if you have a really high IQ, you might do really well on an IQ test, or you might not. If you get a really low score, it does not mean that you're not intelligent. It just means you're not good at IQ tests. And those kind of things. Exams, a job interview doesn't tell anyone whether you can do the job or not. It really doesn't. It tells people that you can do job interviews. So there's a lot of stuff by just helping autistic people to do job interviews. And they sort of think, well, can we flip that and think, why do we need job interviews? We're actually, these are not only not useful for autistic employees and other introverted people, they're not useful for employers. You're not actually getting the bang for your buck if you do an interview, because all you got the person's CV, and that's great. A CV is a really useful way of understanding what they've done and maybe what they can do. But if you have an interview and they do well at an interview, it actually has very little bearing on how good at the job they'll be. And it's a really important thing. So we're not talking about onerous provisions for employers. To rethink recruitment processes and interviews actually has a lot of benefit for employers. So it's about rethinking. A lot of this is just reframing how we approach stuff. And we tend to be a bit flexible as humans. We've had all these processes in place for generations. This is what you do. But it doesn't have to be what you do. And sometimes flipping that and seeing it differently can not just benefit autistic staff members, it can benefit all the staff members and the boss and the company. So that stuff, seeing things in a different light, so thinking outside the box is really important.
Yeah, I think that having those opportunities to show what you can do versus tell what you can do can be really powerful as well.
And the time frame as well, like
so you don't have a time pressure on it.
Yeah, it's and it just, if you start screwing up an interview, it gets worse and worse and worse. You know, and that. Really stressful. It's a really stressful thing for a person to get an interview, and it can be really hard when you're young. When I joined the workforce in 1992, I was 17 and I was living out of home, so I needed the income. I really needed the job. I had no money. And so I got this job, but at the time everyone was talking about how they needed experienced employees. who were young. And I'm thinking, well, if you have young employees, they're not going to be so experienced. And I really felt quite trapped. I felt like it was a bit of a catch-22. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I can't get older. I can't get experience without doing a job. So that kind of thing can be really stressful and demoralising for people. And also, I mean, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 20, so I didn't know that I had barriers to getting a job. It didn't occur to me. I got a job and that was what you did. But I know now some of the stuff, like, of course, having a diagnosis at a young age is generally a very, very good thing, and it means you can access supports and understand yourself better and have an identity and positive autistic pride, all those lovely things.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things it does do is bring a lot of deficits into the conversation about somebody's ability to do things. So if you have, you look at the DSM-5, and there's a reason for this. The criteria within the DSM-5 of autism diagnosis are all negative. They're all deficits. And that is because that's a diagnostic manual. So when people get that diagnosis, it is for the purposes of accessing support. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That's how it works. The problem is that actually isn't the most helpful way of viewing autistic people through all those deficits. You can't do this and you can't do that. The most helpful, in my mind, of viewing autistic people is much more strengths-based and about difference rather than disability. But for kids who come up through, they get a diagnosis early, from school, from home, from everywhere, it can be a real focus on the deficits and what they can't do well. So, that's a really important thing to think about, is that if people have been told their whole life that they can't do things and they're different and that's not necessarily a good thing, when it comes to going for work, there's going to be a lack of confidence, and there's going to be a lack of that. When I go to work, I know I can do my job because I've been there for so long. I'm confident of that. But not being confident of being able to do your job is really difficult for you, and it also reflects really poorly to the employer if people think they don't know what they're doing. No supervisor can go, yay, my staff member's really underconfident. So confidence is really important. So when we're talking about autism and deficits and all of that, it's really important to promote the strengths base, across the life course, not just for kids.
Absolutely. And so what kind of tips would you give an employer in terms of, okay, we've got this this person, they've gone through the interview, they've gone through the getting into the job process, whatever that may have looked like. So now they're at work, but we've still got some challenges around interpersonal skills, around perception of behaviour and confidence. What are some of the things that a manager and employer might be able to do to help build that confidence up in that employee?
I think the first thing that an employer of an autistic staff member needs to do is build their own autism knowledge, both generally and specifically for their employer, and what that means for them. I think that's really important, because often the assumptions people will make from both sides of the equation are really unhelpful and can actually lead to a lot of very bad consequences, even like someone losing their job because there's a misunderstanding. I've got a lovely example. It's not my example. I was in a conference ages ago in Tasmania, and there was a guy who used to manage an employment service, gave the talk before me in our session, and he gave an example of a young man who'd been placed in a sort of office environment, and he was really enjoying it. It was going well. He liked his job. He could see a future there. And then one day, out of the blue, he rings up this guy who's the employment service manager and says, I lost my job. I don't even know why. And so the manager said, well, what happened? She said, well, I had a meeting booked, and so, at 10:30, and so at 10 o'clock, I went past the room, stuck my head in and said, hey, guys, could you please make sure you finish on time and chuck out all your rubbish on the way out? Thank you. Went back to my desk, and a couple of hours later, I got fired. I don't even know what I did. And the manager said, well, who was in the meeting room? Oh, that was the CEO and the board. Now, it sort of sounds funny, but it isn't. And that kind of thing, those misunderstandings. So what the employee's manager would have thought, I can almost guarantee it, he would have been horrified, because it would have reflected very badly on him that one of his staff had gone and insulted senior management. And he also wouldn't have understood why. He probably would have thought that it was complete rudeness, deliberate rudeness and insubordination, and being a right little so-and-so, being very rude and inappropriate deliberately. I'm almost certain in that scenario, just from hearing it, that the young man wanted to prove himself. He was really keen on his job. He wanted to make sure he was organising this meeting. He wanted to make sure it was done well. And he didn't understand the issues of hierarchy. So there's a lot of unwritten rules in the workplace. Yes. And it really helps employers to understand that there are unwritten rules and what they might be, because autistic people go by a different set of rules to that. We often don't pick up on those subtle, nuanced little rules that everybody else is well aware of, and that can lead to situations like that. In an ideal world, that manager would have spoken to that employee and asked why he did what he did. So asking why is a really important thing. If something's not working, ask why, ask what the person thinks about it, that kind of thing. Having a dialogue and being aware that there will be assumptions and misunderstandings, and those need unpacking. Also, listening to things like, if a staff member says, I'm having trouble working with this manager, they mean it. They're not being difficult. When we complain of an interpersonal problem with someone, we often get dismissed. We often have people say, oh, no, they're fine. Well, no, they're not fine. If I raise that a manager I've got or a colleague I've got is making my life really difficult, they are. And that does need to be listened to as much as possible. I mean, understandably, managers need to, allocate work the way they allocate it, but it's really important for them for that one. Also, being aware of sensory stuff, because this can cause people to leave their jobs or lose their jobs as well.
Yeah.
And the problem with sensory stuff, if you don't have it, is that our senses are how we understand the world. They are our reality, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch. This is our way of understanding the world. And a lot of people don't understand that not everyone's sensory experience is the same. And for some people, sensory stuff is off the scale nasty, or nice for that matter. So being aware of that is really important. Some of the common points that are issues for sensory stuff is the background noise in the open plan office. Solution to that, put the person somewhere where there aren't many staff, or put them in a spare office or spare meeting room if that's possible. Lighting, fluorescent lighting and LED lighting can be absolutely horrendously overwhelming for autistic people or for people with sensory processing disorder, because you don't have to be autistic to have that.
Yeah.
I have a friend called Penny, and she wears a baseball cap because when she gives the presentation, she wears a baseball cap because the glary lights just make it impossible for her to focus on what she's saying, and it's really unpleasant. So that's a really important thing to be aware of. Smells, toilet smells. I know somebody who has really, really strong sense of smell and very, very bothered by foul smells. And they have a spare toilet that's just for her, and she can go off in this toilet, and it's one cubicle, so it's not a room full, and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's actually not that hard, and not doing it can make you lose that staff member. The other thing is reassurance and feedback. We generally need this. Some managers don't give any feedback at all. And then at the performance review, they go, oh, that was great. You're doing really well. Keep up the good work. But we don't assume that. I think a lot of people assume if you don't get any feedback at all, it's good, because if you're doing something wrong, then your manager will know it was wrong. But for a lot of autistic people, including me, I do need someone to say, good job, thank you, whatever, for the work, or I doubt myself. And I think, do I know what I'm doing? Is it all okay?
Yeah.
That kind of regular reassurance, even if it's a weekly meeting, if it's talking to your staff member, just going through what's on their plate work-wise and just saying, oh, look, you did that really well, or, you can probably improve there. But that is really important, the feedback, and even constructive feedback. Not everyone likes constructive feedback, but it's quite useful. And also, I think fixating on autistic type stuff, like autistic expression, stimming, things like that, is really unhelpful. Unless it's actually causing an issue in the workplace, just let it be. It's not, I think it's really interesting actually as an autistic employee, because I go to work and I'm really self-conscious that, I don't want to be too out there, or people won't, I'm pretty out there anyway, but that kind of two-way thing about, your expression, and that's actually okay to express yourself as long as it's not disrupting or upsetting anyone. But yeah, I guess that's a few things.
Yeah. So that piece on the feedback, I think, is an interesting one, because I've heard that, and not in relation to autistic people at all, right? But that the value to be gained from regular, just even if it's just a quick slap on the back, or just an in-passing comment from a manager to an employee to acknowledge something that they've done well. It's little things that everybody really appreciates. Even as you say, like, most people will work on the basis of no news is good news, but it doesn't mean I don't like to be told.
No.
Everyone gets it. It pumps you up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone feels a bit better.
Admit something is great, and it doesn't, it takes like half a second. Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, the other thing is not to assume that only the autistic person with the diagnosis is the only autistic person in the workplace. I have worked with people, managers and colleagues who I'm fairly certain were on the spectrum but weren't diagnosed or didn't know or whatever. So that assumption that everyone's neurotypical that isn't neurodivergent with a diagnosis is not helpful, because actually 1 in 100 people in Australia are apparently, that's the figure for autism these days. So if you've got a workplace of 2,000 people, you have at least 20 autistic ones by statistics. So
that's it.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I think there'd be a particular age group where it's less likely that they have a diagnosis or even an awareness.
Yeah, my age or older, basically. I would say, I had a manager once. I loved her to bits. She was fantastic, but I'm fairly certain she was on the spectrum. And she had issues, actually, with people misunderstanding her motivations. But I loved her to bits. And, she read my autobiography and she said, I can see a lot of myself in this. I'm like, yeah, I bet you can. And also, there's no one way of doing this stuff. If you've got a relationship with an employee that's working, even if it's unconventional or doing things in a way that you wouldn't think would work, who cares? Do what works. It's really important.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay.
That's interesting. And then, so we've talked about some rethinking the recruitment process and some of those opportunities to provide better support to employees. What have been some of the kind of key things that you've encountered personally that you thought that works really well? And maybe it's not necessarily just for you, but you could see conceptually it's just a really good move.
Yeah. I've had some amazing managers. I had one, there was some issue, and when I first joined my current workplace, and something came up that needed addressing, and I was really anxious about it. And I went and saw my boss, and I didn't know whether or not I should see my boss. And she was so reassuring, and she said, okay, leave this with me. And she took it on board, and actually it wasn't a big issue at all, and it got resolved. But that was really nice. So a manager who's available, and I really love that when managers are available. I know sometimes they're not because it's so busy. I think actually setting boundaries is really important too. Like if, to say, actually, I'm really busy this week, but I'll talk to you next week and we can sit down and have a meeting together and go through your work, rather than just saying, go away, I'm busy, like actually putting in context the busyness and sort of what I expect out of that, because obviously I work in government administration and it can get pretty hectic at times. I think people just being friendly to me and asking me about stuff, sometimes people get a bit weird, like with the autism thing, and I know I can talk to that. But when people just sort of treat me like anyone else, I guess it's really nice. Mostly that does happen these days, which is lovely, and I have a very supportive and good employer. I guess recognition. I've had a lot of recognition for my good work in the workplace. I've got a couple of awards from CEOs and that kind of thing. So if you do a good job, recognised. We have an ability network at my workplace, and for the last couple of years, I've been a co-chair for that, and that's a great thing. A disability staff network, if you don't have one, get one. They're a great thing. We have a few networks in my workplace. We've got a Pride network, it was called the Wisdom Network, which was for older employees, one for culturally and diverse, one for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So they're really, really good things. And this actually gives an outlet and demonstrates that the employer wants to be an employer of choice for people from diverse groups, which is great for everybody. We use affirmative measures in recruitment for the last couple of years for people with disability and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So this stated commitment to diversity at the highest level is a wonderful thing, and it actually is good for employers. This is not just good for the staff, this is good for the business. So that's really important. And I think just being friendly and kind and appreciating what I do and explaining things to me, and I struggle a lot with micromanagement, which I guess everyone does. There's three things that are going to make an employee not want to be at work. One of them's micromanagement, the other's being bullied, and the other is being placed somewhere completely inappropriate. If you have those things or a combination of them, you will not want to be at work, basically. So I really do struggle with the micromanaging thing. I had one branch head years ago who was just absolute gold. She was the best person. For senior managers, she's the best one I've ever had. And there was a colleague who was just, I'd say she was bullying, but she was very difficult to work with. She was a very angry person and stuff. And I was just I just couldn't do it. I worked next to this person and it was awful. And one day I went into the branch and I said, I can't work with her. And the branch said, right, spare office, in you go. Which actually, and that was instant. That response to this staff member isn't coping with something, in order to make her able to do her job and make her happy, because she was that kind of manager. She really, really cared about people's emotions and their whole self, I suppose. Yeah. And so in action, as soon as she realised there was an issue and it was impacting both me and my ability to do my work, she said, right, here's a solution. And that's really good. I don't really make mistakes. I've probably made about 3 mistakes with consequences in almost 12 years. And I made one once, and my manager, who was the one who I think was probably autistic, I'm very honest and upfront, and there is no point in hiding a mistake because that just makes it 1,000 times worse. So I thought, better bite the bullet. I went in, and there was no blame, and it was like, okay, this has happened, what do we do? And that attitude was really nice. So not sort of blaming people for getting it wrong, but making a practical sense of, okay, this has happened, what do we do? Because I was blaming myself enough. I'm a perfectionist, and most autistic employees, I reckon, will probably be perfectionists, and that's not necessarily a good thing. That's often a very bad thing. I guess the other thing being there for me, when I've got things to say. I am somebody that will talk to the manager a bit more than most people, I think, and work through stuff, because, work's, I love work. I've always loved work, but it can be quite a challenge being there with all those people and, different personalities and stuff, and quite high pressure work. So being able just to go in, the open door policy is a great thing for me, and I can just pop in there as long as, they're not too busy, and say, oh, this is going on, just work through stuff. I found that really helpful. I think that's my ideal manager, is one where just when I need to, I can just go in and have a conversation. So yeah, it's some good things. I've always loved my job. It's been amazing. It's been liberating. I used to live in public housing and I had no money, and now, I own my own place. I'm very proud of what I've done and where I've got to, and having that support from work has just been really lovely. I mean, I've worked hard, I do well myself, but it has been a really lovely thing in my life, that I've had this really solid base of employment, and I've never really felt, I have a very secure job in the scheme of things, but it's been amazing, and credit to my employer at all levels, the supervisor level to the CEO level. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's easy to underestimate sometimes the impact that having like a proper job, having real work, can have on someone's life. Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, we talked about self-advocacy before, and this may not necessarily be, I don't know how this would play out, I'm just trying to think it through, but from an employer's perspective, what are some of the things that they might be able to put in place or to do or to be mindful of to help support someone to self-advocate? And this may even go back to that disclosure piece as well that we mentioned.
I think it's an environmental thing. I think you can tell when you're in a workplace, or I can, when I'm in a workplace that is supportive and is quite happy for me to talk about autism and all of those things, is quite happy for me to be myself. I think it's an attitude. It's a corporate attitude. It's a cultural thing within that business. And it can work from, an employer of 2,000 people down to an employer of 3 people. And it really is the feeling that you get when you're at work. And I think most people that I know would probably relate to this. You can tell when you're in a workplace where disclosing and talking about your autism is going to be frowned upon and is going to make your life difficult. Of course, in my world, I would like that to be no employers like that, and all of them where this is me. But I think it really is a cultural thing. It comes down to culture of the workplace. And, of course, cultural change is the hardest thing to do of anything, to my mind, in an especially a bigger employer. The hardest thing to do is to change the culture. So if you've already got that, that's a great thing.
Yeah, it's a challenge because and this has been talking to students at university, and I think there's quite a substantial percentage of students on the spectrum at university who don't disclose due to concerns around stigma.
Yes, very common. Yeah,
and I'm just wondering how much of that then rolls through into common workplaces, typically, because
I think it's harder for most people to disclose at work than it is at uni. That's my general experience. I think the problem is if you don't disclose and anything goes wrong, you have a meltdown at work and nobody knows you're autistic. No one's going to put any context around that. No. And they'll just be poor behaviour and you're chucking a wobbler for no good reason. So I've always found that disclosure for me is the important thing. Just because of that. And if I need any workplace adjustments or anything, well, if I don't have some reason to access those, no one will give them to me. And it is a really difficult decision, though. And I tend to say with disclosure, it's individual for each person and for each workplace and for each job within the same workplace. It really is. I suggest having a strategy. So you think about what you want to do and what outcome you want from whether or not you disclose. You can change that when it comes to the situation, but it's useful to have that so you've thought about it and considered it, and then you can adapt it as necessary. But it's a really difficult decision. There's also in the process of employment, there's a few stages at which you can choose to or not. So when you apply for the job, you could tell them. When you have the interview, you could tell them. When you get offered the job, you can tell them. When you start the job, you can tell them. Or when you've been in the job for a little while, you can tell them. So there's 5 elements of when do I actually do this. And the other one is who do I do it to? Because when I'm at work, I can disclose in the HR system. When I join, when I go on the intranet and do my HR stuff, I can put I can disclose in the staff census that goes out to the whole public service. I can disclose to my manager, and these are all very different things, and they all mean very different things in terms of what that will result in for me. So it's a huge issue. It is a huge issue, and sometimes it backfires. Sometimes you think, I should in this situation, or I shouldn't in this situation, and you found out you should have done the other thing. Sorry, I just had a message from a friend. I thought I'd turn that off. Anyway, stupid computer. Yes, I think disclosure is a really major issue, and it's a major consideration for anyone who has some kind of hidden disability or difference.
Because I think you've got that. We talked about the interview process. So if you're coming into that recruitment part of the work experience, it does seem like it's a really critical juncture, and not disclosing, for many people on the spectrum, they're going to put themselves at a disadvantage. I mean, I know you probably know plenty as well who will sail through an interview, no drama. Yeah, they can cope with that. It's fine. But there's plenty who don't. But then it's kind of I think there's this: can I disclose now and then not later until I feel it's more appropriate? So how do you feel that can work out?
Well, for me, I've always for the last sort of 15 years, I've disclosed to employers, and it's worked well for me. It's difficult though, because it is something in hindsight whether you made the right choice.
Yes.
I'm good at interview. I'm very good at job interviews. I'm unusual in that regard, but I've always been very good at job interviews. But I do know that a lot of people aren't. The problem is as well, there are times at which it's going to really disadvantage you if you're going to be disadvantaged, and it might result in not getting the job. Now, of course, discrimination is completely illegal, but it's also impossible to prove. And no employer is going to say you didn't get the job because you have a disability. They'll just say you weren't the right candidate. And that is a huge problem, is that hidden discrimination, that people are fairly certain that's why they didn't get it, but there is no proving it. There is no way of proving that unless the employer actually says. And yes, employers aren't that silly, sadly. But there are points. If you do disclose when you apply or to interview, then there's a definite risk that you won't be offered the job. So that one is worth a lot of consideration. That is definitely worth thinking about. If you've been offered the job or you've started, they're not going to say, no, you can't have the job, because that would be very clear and obvious discrimination and you could sue the pants off them. But those pre-decision disclosure points can be quite tricky. And I generally suggest that unless they really need to, I would generally, or if it's a job related to autism, if it's actually a job related to autism or disability or advocacy or community services, disclosure is probably a plus. I think in those situations, it is probably a very good thing to do. If you're applying for a job at Advocacy for Inclusion, saying you have a disability is a very good thing, generally. But if you're applying for a job in a big corporation, it might not be. So I guess it's about knowing the circumstance as well. But yes, those sort of pre-decision about whether you get the job or not, it's quite a sensitive time, and I would suggest people really carefully consider whether they have to at that point.
Yeah. So, and I know there's lots of employers who it's not are very that are supportive of difference, and many of them are keen to increase their pool of different people. I think sometimes it might be a bit of a challenge around positioning themselves around the level of support and the how genuine that really is. And sometimes you might get a question in an application form that could be a little bit tricky to work your way through. But have you seen examples of where that can be presented really well and made really clear?
Oh, I think that's really important, actually. There's some companies that are doing really good things. ANZ, for example, the ANZ Bank is doing some wonderful work around this, as is Westpac, and actually finding people who are different and genuinely making that work, and also tailoring jobs to people rather than putting people in jobs. And so this person has this skill set, so where can we put them in the organisation? I think that's a really lovely, genuine commitment. That's saying, well, diversity is great because, and this is very true, diversity is great for an employer because you get a whole bunch of different thinkers, you get a whole bunch of different approaches. If you're in knowledge work or in business, in a corporation, banking, that kind of thing, these are huge pluses. You want people that can think outside the box. You want people that are going to work together with other people who are different. Diversity is actually a huge plus. For a lot of employers, that is the case. There is a lag between some employers and other employers, so some haven't caught up and they need to figure that out. Some do pay lip service. Some, oh yes, we're an employer of choice, and then actually the people with disability working there aren't all that happy. It's not a very supportive place. But I do know that some of the corporates now are doing some amazing things and actually putting people in work and finding. I mean, I gave a talk up at Westpac in Sydney a few months ago, and they employed people with a view to finding somewhere where that person will go. So instead of saying, we have this job of counting widgets, they say, person who's really good at all this stuff, put them here. And I think that's a great thing, and that great commitment to genuine diversity. But I do think some employers are saying they do this stuff and they're not quite there yet, and then other employers don't even say they're doing it. So I think there needs to be a lot of work in this space with employers to help them understand that genuine diversity in the workforce is actually great for business, and you're not going to convince employers of anything if you don't get it down to their bottom line, because that's what they're doing. That's why they're there. And actually, genuine diversity is good for the bottom line for a vast range of employers.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think there has been some research around it, but maybe not enough. And hopefully, there's more case studies that other employers can turn to and see that there is genuine commercial value. It's not just a charity play. It's not just corporate social responsibility. It actually makes real good sense.
Absolutely. You're not going to get businesses to do anything if you tell them it's because they're nice. You're being nice if you do this. I mean, yes, businesses aren't unpleasant generally, but they're not going to be motivated to employ people because it's nice. They will be motivated to employ people if it's going to increase their business. And that's basically, I talk to a lot of CEOs, and that's my starting point. It's like, this will actually help you to do what you do better.
Mm. Awesome. And I think that feels to me like a really nice, neat place to put a bow on it. I say thanks again, Janette, for your time today. Really appreciated it. It's been good, been a great chat, been very insightful, and I hope people really get something out of it. So thank you very much.
And I thank you for having me. I've got to go do another one now.
You're a busy girl, no problem. Thanks a lot, Janette. Cheers then.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the show. I really hope that you got something out of it and that you feel like you learned something new. If you did find the show helpful, please leave a rating and or a comment, as it will really help to spread these lessons and insights wider and hopefully inspire more people to take the next step toward creating more inclusive workplaces. Also, if there is a topic or guest that you'd like me to explore or have on the show, drop me an email or reach out on LinkedIn. Your input is what will help keep the show relevant and helpful going forward. So, until next time, let's work together and level the playing field for neurodiverse job seekers.